We're talking Vegas lines and what NHL games on the schedule to target for DFS. It's DraftKings Hockey 101, and we're starting right now. What's up, guys? Welcome to another daily fantasy sports video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a profitable DFS player and get better at betting, start now by subscribing to the channel, but don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. And if you're already a Holkamaniac, you know exactly what time it is. Smash that like button and we'll get rolling.
Hockey is still probably the best GPP sport that there is. Joe and I have talked about it countless times. If anyone used to follow us on the Inside the Lab show, the GPP stuff for hockey is just incredible because people are just so low owned, no matter who they are on any given slate, that you're going to get guys at 15, 20% owned that are the chalkiest plays on the slate. Where if you look at any other sport, those guys are going to be 60, 70+% owned. So if you like GPPs and you like spending very little time with creating lineups, once you get used to hockey, it's a very simple lineup creation.
Today is going to be more about kind of learning some of the basics with NHL. There is very specific things that I think some people are definitely doing wrong. Shout out everyone in the channel that's been kind of following along with NHL for quite some time. We do have like a very loyal group of NHL people in the Discord. So everyone, if you are in the Discord already, be sure and check that out. A bunch of content's going to be going up on YouTube. All this educational type stuff is where that's going to be. All the live stuff will be here. So yeah, I want to dive into just kind of the real basics first, Sean. So you mentioned that ownership tends to be very spread out in NHL. So I'm going to bring us just over to the Vegas lines in general. So one of the first things that I think a lot of people are going to kind of bring up when they start building lineups is the Vegas page. And like you mentioned, ownership in NHL tends to be extremely spread out regardless of the slate. So it kind of lends itself in a completely different way to tournaments in something like NBA, where ownership tends to be extremely clustered. So talk a little bit about Vegas lines and how that impacts kind of ownership. But I know we've talked about it before too. I honestly think that night in, night out, these best spots of the night are basically under-owned relative to what they should be.
Yeah, in other sports, you use Vegas totals to determine whether a game's going to be a blowout, who's favored, who's going to play, how explosive the game's going to be. You do similar things with hockey. The only difference is in hockey, you don't really worry about a blowout. If a team's up like 4 or 5 goals, you might see the Stars maybe limit themselves a minute or two compared to what they normally would be. But it's not what it is in NBA or other sports where they might be completely removed from the game. But the Vegas page, you get to look at the Vegas page and you get to see which teams are heavily favored. You get to see which totals in games are high, so you can expect a higher explosive scoring game that's going to be up tempo. So you can see a bunch of stuff on this page. And then what you do is you determine which lines you like for those teams, what spots you like the best. And there's usually a bunch of similar spots. Like you see tonight, there is about 7 or 8 spots that have a team total implied between 3.4 and 4 goals.
Yeah.
So the difference in that is only going to be 0.6 goals. So you're not really realizing tons difference between maybe the top spot to the bottom spot, which is why ownership ends up being varied so highly.
Yeah, today's obviously a massive slate as well, but more often than not, we do see a pretty decent size consistency spike in games where there are teams implied for 3.5 or more goals. We'll get kind of into some of the studies that I've done at Fantasy Labs. Definitely wanted to kind of highlight some of that stuff that's, I guess been kind of buried that I still think is pretty good information. So we'll go through some of that stuff when we talk about more of the stats to go through. But yeah, the Vegas page is where a lot of people are going to start building their lineups. I always say in tournaments, a lot of times it's nice to kind of go past this top tier and really attack some of the teams that are just outside of that, who might still be in really good spots, but might get significantly lower ownership on. Another thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough for NHL is really targeting some of these games that start a bit later. Similarly to MLB, you'll get much lower ownership on some of these West Coast games as well. So something like tonight, Edmonton is at home against Chicago, 3.5 implied goals. You might get them at much lower ownership than someone that is starting at 7, like the Washington Capitals at home against Vancouver. So that's stuff that I'm kind of thinking about from an ownership perspective. Before we move on from this page, Sean, is it like if we move all the way down to like kind of the bottom here, are you like just completely Xing out some of these teams on the road with lower totals?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teams like that, especially on a slate that's this big, you don't really need to look at teams that are poor. That said, there may be pieces on those teams that you want.
Yep.
So you may not stack a full line, whereas you might stack a full line for a team like Dallas. Maybe you'll find one player on a team like Anaheim that is way too cheap for what you're going to get out of them. And then you can plug them in as a one-off that's not going to be owned, so that if they end up going off, you still get them pretty clean as well.
By the way, guys, if you've ever found value in any of my videos or live streams, one of the best ways to support what I'm doing here for free is to throw me the follow over on Twitter. But if you're new to the community, I also do a ton of content exclusive to Instagram. So if you take a few seconds and just make sure you're following me over there as well, I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, question in the chat I think is a good one. So Doozy, one of the NHL grinders we have, it wants to know how valuable it is looking at individual lineup matches. I believe you mean like line one versus kind of the other team. I think the one thing that stands out to me is something like if a team is in Boston, for example, there's going to be last change for the Bruins at home. And for people that aren't familiar with hockey, last change, essentially when a team lines up for a face-off, the home team always has the ability to make the last line change. So if they really wanted to match up Bergeron, their number one center, against the top line, say they're playing Edmonton, they really want Bergeron against Connor McDavid. Like those are the situations where a team has a completely elite defensive center and is at home. That's something that I would probably take into account. But do you ever really look at the matchup type stuff like in that way, Sean, or is that mostly how you're approaching it as well?
Yeah, you can. Something Joe will tell you, one of my biggest attributes in DFS is my ability to lineup construct and just sort of funnel noise.
Yeah.
So if I don't think something's super valuable, I'll just sort of not even look at it and not really care. I think it definitely has some validity to it. So it's not like it's something that doesn't impact things at all. However, it's just not one of the more impactful things that I would look at. So therefore, I wouldn't necessarily spend time on it, because time that you have to look at things is going to be limited. So I'd rather use my time on other things. I used to be a bit more open. It depends if you have a team that has like a lockdown center like Bergeron, a lockdown defensive pair like back when like Suter and Weber were on Nashville. And there's obviously still some pairs like that. But you can look through previous game logs. But the key is to look at the difference of where the game is. Because a situation where the game's home, a team might last change Bergeron onto a certain line. Well, when they're away, that might not be the matchup that you get, because a certain team might try to move players away from them. So depending where the game is going to impact that matchup, and you might get different matchups. But in general, hockey is very fluid, and especially with line changes, teams will get players out against different opponents. So even though you might look at a defensive rating for a team, that might only be relevant for maybe 25 percentile of the game, because teams are able to move things around. You have power play time, you have penalty kill time, and things like that as well.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on in the first place is because, I mean, I think, and not even just NHL, in a lot of sports, you've really helped me personally kind of sift through what stuff really matters and which stuff doesn't matter. So we'll go through some of these studies, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong, Sean. You've never been scared to do that. Just a reminder, if you're looking to invest in yourself and take your game to that next level, make sure you're taking advantage of the live streams over on Twitch. A lot of people don't realize that if they have an Amazon Prime account, and a lot of people do these days, you automatically have access to a free Twitch Prime subscription. So with that, you get access to my premium Discord chat, as well as a bunch of other subscriber-only perks for various sports. You're seriously doing yourself a disservice if you're not getting involved with the community at that level. Make sure you follow me at twitch.tv/Joe Holka so you don't miss when I go live. The team ratings page, a free page at Fantasy Labs, but this is where we can actually kind of get an idea of where these teams are actually from a matchup perspective, but more importantly for shots, because what we really want in NHL is to stack up shot opportunities, and this is where we're kind of getting an idea of which games are going to be the highest pace. So Sean, talk a little bit about the team ratings page. Our Corsi 4 expectation is something that we used a ton when we were at Labs, but anything else that you want to touch on quickly here?
Yeah, so you look at the team rating page, and it indicates which teams take a lot of shots, which teams give up a lot of shots. Goals in general are just high variance. And in general, the more shots you take, the more goals you're going to score. Or at least in general, the more shots you take, the more fantasy points you're going to put up, because they're shots. So if you have a team that takes a pile of shots against a team that gives up a pile of shots, you could even add what you would expect for them on a given day. So if a team has a Corsi 4 that is just massive in terms of what their more recent volume is over even the year, you can expect that team's going to have the most sort of opportunities that night to score in general. And in general, if you look at that and you see against a team that gives up a mass amount of shots, that's an even better spot than you normally find. But there are teams that are good, that are up-tempo teams that skate up and down the ice. One of those teams is Toronto. They give up a lot of shots, even though they take a lot of shots. So, like, you have a matchup against Toronto, and let's say Toronto is a heavy favorite on night, doesn't necessarily mean the other team isn't going to get chances as well.
Yeah, it's similarly to someone like Winnipeg. Like they give up a ton of shots, not a ton of goals. They're fully willing to kind of play up and down, play a high tempo game. Like the ones that I think that are kind of interesting to look at least. So like Colorado, for example, they don't give up a ton of shots, but they give up a ton of goals. Like these aren't necessarily situations I'm chasing. Like I'm not chasing efficiency in NHL. Like if we haven't touched on it yet, the most important thing is to stack up shots, block shots. Chasing goals is a great way to lose money in NHL, to be completely honest. So the difference between, so just like sorting by goals against over the past month, Colorado's been giving up a ton of goals on not a ton of shots, but someone like Anaheim, they're giving up a similar number of goals, but they're also giving up almost 10 more Corsi per game. So I'd be much more interested in attacking a team like Anaheim than a team like Colorado from that perspective. So this Corsi 4 metric basically takes into account the offensive side, so teams that shoot a lot, teams like Colorado, Boston, your Sabres, Sean, shoot a lot, but it's also taking into account the matchup as well. So it's a really good metric. If you use one column on this entire page, this Corsi 4 is pretty solid. The goals for is going to be basically it's going to mirror Vegas lines pretty heavily. So I more or less am looking at the tails. I want teams that are in really good Corsi situations, but also want to avoid these teams that might have a lower Corsi 4 expectation. So just looking at this in particular, a couple of teams that were high up on the Vegas page. Let's just talk about Winnipeg, 3.5 implied goals. They haven't been taking a ton of shots lately, but also they're playing against San Jose. So San Jose is a team that limits a ton of shots. So on this 12-game slate, bottom 5 in Corsi against over the past month. So pretty tough matchup for a team like Winnipeg, even though they have a high-flying offense. Those are situations that not necessarily have to be avoided, but they definitely have a lower floor. Anything else to add there, Sean?
Yeah, that's something to definitely take a look at. And when you talk about like the goals against and you look back through that, all the other teams that were giving up a lot of goals are teams that are giving up a lot of shots. You look directly below them, and those are all the teams that are giving up a lot of shots. So what you expect is that number to sort of revert back to a little bit more of the mean, and you would expect the Colorado team to fall from that top team in goals against, and you expect them to be more towards the bottom third of the list. So like Joe said, you want to attack teams that are giving up a lot of shots, because that is probably going to be the more consistent teams in terms of giving up goals.
Yeah, so when you're looking to try and stack up a team, I'm more apt to stack up a team that, yeah, has a high Vegas implied total, of course, but you can find kind of under-owned teams in this way as well that more or less are going to be generating a ton of shot opportunities. Like Sean said, if there's a spot where maybe a team's giving up a lot of shots, maybe not a ton of goals yet, that might be a situation where it might regress back to the mean and they will be giving up a lot more goals in the near future. So that's kind of how I'm using this page. This is what I actually like to use this page before I even go to the Vegas page, just so I'm not really blinded by what the Vegas lines are, and I still have just a better idea of the slate as a whole. If you want to learn more about how to become a profitable daily fantasy sports player and better, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right hand corner so you don't miss anything. Be on the lookout for all of my DFS courses for other sports. Of course, they're all on demand, completely free. But finish off the hockey course first, and I will see you guys next time.